Joining me now is Dr. Kavita Patel, former health policy director for the Obama White House. Dr. Patel, thanks very much for being with us. I wanted to do some fact-checking with you. First of all, claiming that there's a cure, and also, how is it for people who don't know any better, or who listen to the president thinking he's authoritative, to think that there is a cure for this disease?
Yeah, Andrea, it's a great set of questions. There is no cure for coronavirus COVID-19, so that's a fact. And certainly the president, I think, has done his share in spreading misinformation. And to your point, more candidly, if you're listening, you would believe the commander-in-chief. Why not? And this is a series of misinformations, including that there is no cure. That's a fact. If people think there's a cure, it might make them more prone, Andrea, to do other things like not wear masks or take precautions that we know can protect you. And that leads to a whole other level of misinformation that was spread last night about masks as well. But that is, unfortunately, we do not have a cure. We have promising treatments, but you have to be generally hospitalized with pretty severe illness to get those treatments. And even then, it's not a cure or a treatment that you can guarantee will get you out of the hospital safely.
And in talking about his own ability to combat the coronavirus, he keeps talking about how he is immune. Now, because he took Regeneron, which gives you antibodies, synthetic antibodies. According to the New York Times, and this gets into your area, not mine, but according to the New York Times today, the monoclonal antibodies that he received were produced by the drug company will wane in a matter of weeks, as the synthetic molecules are known to do. Without replenishment, this decline may leave Mr. Trump even more susceptible to the virus than most patients who have recovered naturally from COVID-19. Several experts are warning. Is there something to that?
Yes, this gets into an area where we're still trying to understand how these artificial kind of antibodies, to your point, the ones the president received, which are still experimental, Andrea. So I want to stress that. These kind of artificially administered antibodies, we believe, can provide you some protection like it did in the president, most likely. Again, we still don't have clear details on what's happened to him, so we're relying on these statements he's made and his physician has made. But you're right, they don't last forever. And even natural immunity, Andrea, just what if you and I were infected, we believe that our body has some sort of natural immunity response. It's not clear how long that would last, maybe months, but maybe longer. But again, it's not enough to give anybody protection or say that they're, quote, immune from the disease. And in fact, we're watching people closely to make sure that they are not infected again, or there are very limited cases of reinfection with COVID-19, but they do exist, Andrea. And that's why we want everyone to still, even if they were infected, wear masks, keep a distance, wash their hands, and take precautions.
And that other claim you alluded to a moment ago about his claiming that 85% of people who wear masks catch COVID. Let me show you that exchange, because Savannah tried to correct him on this.
I'm good with masks. I'm okay with masks. I tell people wear masks. But just the other day, they came out with a statement that 85% of the people that wear masks catch it.
Well,
so, you know,
they
this
didn't
is
say
a
that.
very
I know
tricky,
that study.
That's what I heard, and that's what I saw.
I mean, that he is completely misinterpreting a CDC report based on a misinterpretation or a deliberate, false misinterpretation on Fox News.
Yeah, let's be clear about what that CDC report stated. And by the way, the CDC themselves have been trying to make sure they clarify the president's misinformation. It was a study that compared about 160 people that had coronavirus with people who did not. And they tried to compare the differences between these people who had it and who did not. And here was the takeaway. The takeaway is that a majority of the people who caught coronavirus were in bars, restaurants, and small settings. And they noted that approximately 85% of people who caught coronavirus also reported often using masks. But the key finding in that study is that they went to restaurants and bars where they admitted that they took off their masks to eat or drink, Andrea, just like you and I would. And so the key finding the CDC wanted to stress is that even people who are trying to protect themselves by wearing masks find themselves in situations where they're close contact with people, and that is the overwhelming factor, not the misinformation or the misstatement about the statistics around masks. Masks are not a silver panacea, but they do help. And that's the important point to make there.
It's so helpful to have you with us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Patel.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.